Keto diet versus balanced diet. What's a keto diet? What's a balanced diet? Or could keto even be a balanced diet? Coming right up. So everyone might have their opinion about what a balanced diet is, but I'm just going to introduce a definition of a balanced diet that I hope we can all agree on for the purposes of what we're going to talk about today. So, a balanced diet, by my definition, is the diet that either maintains balance in the body or restores balance to the body. Most of what people are suffering from today is things like high blood pressure, obesity, diabetes, insulin resistance, the modern degenerative diseases. And they are all diseases of imbalance. So if there's a diet that can restore that balance, that would be the balanced diet. Can we just agree on that? Good. If we want to maintain a balance in the body, that can be very, very different from trying to restore balance to the body. So what is a balanced diet? Most of us have heard the word, we've heard the term thrown around very carelessly. And usually it means that we should eat something like the food pyramid, that we should eat lots of grains and rice and potato and vegetables and meats and not so much fat and so forth. And we have sort of accepted, without thinking about it, that that is the balanced diet because that's what has been recommended for the last 50 years, and that's what most people have been eating more or less in the range of for this last century. So we think that's balanced just because we're familiar with it. It seems normal. It's what if we go to a restaurant, that's what we find on the menus. If we go to the store, that's what's on all the shelves. But balanced, again, is not what we have been eating or that what's recommended. Balanced is what can bring the body back to balance. What's an extreme diet? A lot of the keto, the Atkins, the paleo, they're often seen as extreme diets because they're different than the mainstream or the standard or the balanced or the recommended diet. But we have to start thinking about where do humans come from? How long have we been around? What did we eat for the most part? And there's a huge variety in that depending on where you lived in the world, if you were an Aborigine in Australia, or if you were an Eskimo up in the Arctic, or if you lived someplace in the Swiss Alps, there's an enormous difference in the foods available, but people typically did really well as long as they ate whole food. So we have to think about something else here, the difference between maintain and restore. If you're 20 years old and very active and you don't have insulin resistance, then you can maintain that balance, not getting insulin resistance, with quite a bit of carbohydrate. You have a wide range of foods available to eat without disrupting that balance significantly. But if you have had 10 or 20 years of sugar and you have packed your liver full of sugar and fat and become insulin resistant, then we want to think of that as you broke your carbohydrate machine. Your body has all these different systems to break down and process and burn and store carbohydrates as fat, but if you break it, if you abuse that machine for a very long time, then it doesn't work anymore. And now the rules change. You can't do the same things that you would do to maintain as you would to restore. And I think this is the biggest problem with the standard official guidelines, that even though a lot of young active people could maintain their health, could not develop insulin resistance if they're active and they eat a lot like that, that rule doesn't apply to people who have already developed insulin resistance, and that is most of us. If we look at the number of obese and overweight people, and assuming that insulin resistance has something to do with that, which is most likely does, then that is about 80% of the population in the US, and probably not too different in most Western countries. Now we might have to do what's considered a little bit more extreme, but the extreme might be the appropriate, the balanced thing for the person in that situation. So let's just go through here a few different principles. So keto is typically considered a very low carb. That's when you reduce the carbohydrates so low that the body has to get adapted to an alternate fuel. It has to start burning fat instead. And if we do that for some period of time, then the body can start pulling fat out of the cells. It can ease up the sugar and fat pressure on the cells and the liver, and we can start cleaning out the system. We can start using the fuel instead of just storing it. And insulin is a storage hormone. So anytime we eat and insulin goes up, we are storing something. When we eat less carbs or we go longer between meals, we're using up the fuel and insulin goes down. So keto is a very low carb diet, usually 10 to 50 grams of net carbs or 2 to 10% of calories from carbohydrate. And why is that range so large? Because everyone is different. Because we have different genetics, we have different heritage, different ethnicity, we are different ages. Some people might be teenagers, others might be 60, 70 years old. The rules change. If we are insulin resistant, how insulin resistant are we? Are we just a little bit that we can walk it off? Or are we extremely insulin resistant where we have to do a lot of things right, more extreme things for a period of time to reverse that? How long have we been insulin resistant? Just a few years or decades? What's our activity level? What's our ability to utilize the fuel? And what's our body size? Obviously, a 5-foot person is going to have different energy requirements than a 6'6" person. Keto is a very low carb diet that is so low in carbs that the body has to develop a alternate source of fuel. It has to develop mechanisms to get the energy from fat instead. And in terms of low carb, obviously fasting is the lowest carb because that's when you don't eat anything. So if you can extend the periods of fasting in addition to doing a low carb diet, then that would increase the body's ability to reverse that insulin. Low carb to a lot of people would be maybe 50 to 100 grams, somewhere between 10 to 20% of calories from carbohydrate. And for some people, that might even be enough to reverse their insulin resistance. If they have a lot of these factors sort of in their favor, they might go low carb and still reverse their insulin resistance. It is unlikely, though, that if you have developed insulin resistance, that you could reverse it with the standard American diet. That diet recommends 45 to 65% of carbohydrates, of calories from carbohydrates, somewhere between 250 and 350 grams a day. And there are probably people who can maintain health at that level, but very, very few people, if any, can probably reverse significant insulin resistance or weight problems on that kind of diet. There are a lot of different cultures around the world, and some people eat a lot of corn and some people eat a lot of rice, and they all seem to do relatively well until they introduce sugar. Because sugar is something that puts the insulin in turbo mode, and in terms of getting the liver clogged up and insulin resistance, sugar is many, many, many times worse than any other normally occurring carbohydrate. So there's a lot of people, a lot of populations that have eaten high-carb diets without developing insulin resistance because they did not have a lot of processed food and not a lot of sugar. But again, once you have broken the machine, the rules change. And we can't look at the people who are able to maintain a healthy level on high carb and say, look, they're healthy with that diet, therefore you should be able to be healthy on that diet. It doesn't work that way. So if you have very stubborn weight or if you have diabetes, then I would suggest that the balanced diet for you is ketogenic diet with intermittent fasting. Some of you might get away with low carb and eating fewer meals. Just try it out and see what works for you. Once you have restored your balance, once you have returned to health and you're insulin sensitive again, now you have a little more flexibility. Now you have some leeway. You can probably introduce some potatoes and some rice and end up in the low carb range here. Maybe you can or maybe you can't. Okay? These variables will determine that, and you just have to keep an eye on it to see what works for you. If you lose the weight and you feel healthy and your insulin resistance goes away, and then you start increasing the carbs and your A1C and your insulin goes up again, then that wasn't okay for you. And chances are that if you have been insulin resistant, that the standard American diet will never be okay for you again, because once you have broken your machine, even if you reverse it, it's never the same as what it was when you were a teenager. What is the most appropriate diet? I think that as humans, if we have not broken our machine, if we have not developed the insulin resistance in the first place, I think the healthiest diet is somewhere around low carb. I believe that's what humans have been eating for most of the time that we have been here on the planet. And I do believe that that was seasonal, that depending on where we lived, for the most part, we did not have equal access to food all around the year. So I think that we were cycling between low carb and keto and fasting depending on what was available. So I believe that as long as you're insulin resistant, you probably want to do keto and fasting. Once you have more normal levels, I think that you want to go between low carb, keto, and fasting and alternate those to keep your body on its toes, so to speak. If you like what you heard, make sure that you subscribe and hit that notification bell, and then also click that share button so that you can get this content out to people on Reddit and Facebook and Twitter, because there's so much confusion out there and people are looking for some common sense. They want to understand how this stuff works. So help us help them. Thanks for watching.